waiting on about like more than 10, so we'll just keep waiting a few more minutes. So if anyone else is going to join us, we'll come. I'll give whoever else is having problems joining us just a few minutes. So we have some important announcements at the beginning. Thanks, Gretchen, I got your message. Okay, well, we're still missing, say, like 5 or 6 of us, but I'll go ahead and get started, and then if anyone else comes in, we'll just kind of catch them up. But welcome back to our first official lab for Anatomy and Physiology Lab. Thank you all again for joining me. I'm glad that I see so many people are back here and ready to do Lab 1. Let me go ahead and share my screen because like I said, have some important announcements to start off with. And get to the lab. Can you all see my screen? Yes, and is it a Google Slides? Is that what you see? Yes, okay, great. I am trying to navigate 2 monitors, which I have never done before in my life, so we will see if this works. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to start off by just checking in on how everyone's doing. Like you all know, I've reiterated many, many times, I am still a student as well. I also got the email that you all got recently about classes going online. And I acknowledge that, you know, everyone will be feeling a little bit differently right now. Some of us might be feeling like, you know what, we can't let things bother us. You know, this happened to us before, let's keep going. Some of us might be a little checked out today because there's a few other things on our mind. And wherever you are on that spectrum tonight, I fully acknowledge and I, you know, support you with what you're feeling right now. I know this is going to be a difficult time for all of us. Message. Yeah, Josh, I will address that in 1 second, but thank you, Caitlin. Those are due before class. Okay. So yeah, this is a little weird right now, and that's important for us to acknowledge, right? So I want to start off by saying that today's class, as all classes, are going to be recorded. I have done my best to put in some breaks into the class. At any point, if you need to step out, you need to grab some water, you need to just like lay on your bed for a little bit and think about what's going on and just regroup before you keep coming back to our class today. I am fully okay with that. I just want to be kept in the loop what's going on. So if you need to step away, just shoot me a private message that you need to step away for a minute. If you need to leave the class completely, today we're not going to be giving a penalty if you want to do group work on your own. Of course, I'd love for you to stay, and even if you have to keep checking in and out, that's completely fine with me. And it might be beneficial for you to stay just so that you don't have work pile up in the end. But I also completely understand if you want to leave and do the work on your own. There will be no 25% off penalty like there is normally for weeks when you have an unexcused absence. So I just want to reiterate that everyone understands what I'm saying today, that you may leave the class if you would like. The class is recorded. Do the work on your own, submit it to your Dropbox, and you will not get penalized. Otherwise, at any point if you need a break, just let me know that you're going to be stepping out, and we should be all good. Can I get a thumbs up that everyone understands that? Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions on just that first point? Okay. Alrighty, looks good, looks good. At any point, if you need anything from me for today's class, just let me know. We'll take it at the pace that we need to take it. So that's what we're gonna do today. Next thing, so Annie is actually gonna be our lab assistant for this class. I'm really, really excited to have her, and you all should be excited as well. So Annie, do you wanna just say a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to the class?
Hi guys, I'm Annie. I took this class in the spring, so I have like a half in-person, half online kind of experience. If anyone's interested in the kind of differences that might be. But as an LA, I'm just here as like another outlet for you to seek help from. Feel free to email me whenever, private message through the chat. I guess, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So like I said, we're really grateful to have you, Annie, here with us. There'll be one other person who will be just kind of rotating through the groups, facilitating discussion, answering questions. Like Annie said, I really want to reiterate this point. If at any point when I'm discussing something, you have a question or something's not clear and you want to put it in the group chat, by all means, go for it. You can even private message Annie if you're like, hey, this might be a silly question, which, by the way, no silly questions. But I feel a little silly asking this question in front of the whole class. Do you mind helping me figure out what's going on? And Annie will be there to help you answer that question. Of course, I will be too, but I might be a little less responsive in the chat like I talked about last week. It will be definitely very helpful to have another person there monitoring the chat. So please do use that as another resource today to communicate with each other, with Annie, or with myself. Everyone good on that? Any questions about what Annie's role is today or for the rest of our labs? No, we didn't have another person last time, so it should be great. Okay. I'll quickly address group work, teamwork, and collaboration. So the class is structured in a way that really emphasizes group work and working together as an outlet, as a method of learning the material, right? So even though you have a lot of structured self-learning, we come together as a class, we come together in small breakout rooms to work, put our brains together to come up with solutions to the problems that were being proposed in our case studies. So if at any point your group work is not operating in that manner, it's not being productive in its function, please let me know. But I really encourage everyone to hear each other's voices, let each other speak, right? Even though you might think that you have exactly the right answer, and it's just easy peasy, lemon squeezy, you got it, no big deal. That might not be the case for someone else. Someone might have been missed. Or the other case could be that you think it's this answer, and then it's actually not, right? So you may be silencing another answer that can help you to learn and to grow in this material. So please listen to each other. Please speak up when you can. Please allow others the space to speak up when they need to, and work together. And if you ever have any problems with that, please let me know. We really do want to facilitate a place where we're helping each other learn rather than bringing each other down. Okay. And if you have any questions about that and you want to speak privately on that, please let me know. Alrighty, so I'm just going to quickly touch on the spell correctly and be specific point that I have up here. I don't think I mentioned this last week, and if I did, then just stop me, we'll keep moving on. But for quizzes, it's really, really important for you to spell correctly, right? So when we're in the medical field, it's important that we're actually addressing what we mean. These are some complicated words. Sometimes they're not very intuitive spellings. So ensuring that you're spelling things correctly, make sure that you're not making silly mistakes and can lead to miscommunications, right? The important thing to note about the spell correctly, though, is that sometimes we still, no matter what we try, we still spell incorrectly, right? And so the one caveat to this request about spelling correctly is that as long as I can pronounce the word out loud and it sounds exactly like the word is supposed to sound, then you're good. You're golden. You have those points. There might be a little bit discussion on that and making sure that your spelling does fall into the category of acceptable. This is why I really strongly encourage you all to spell correctly, because it just takes out any miscommunication in general. But say you do spell something phonetically, you will get points for that. Again, not obviously ideal, but that is one caveat that we have. And be specific. So if you are on a quiz or even like a GRQ and you have a question, you're like, well, it could be this larger, this overall broad region, or it could be this very specific structure that I know is in this area that fits this question as well. Always go with specific. That'll always be better than going with the more broad answer. So keep those two things in mind when you're answering any free response. Does anyone have any questions on that? You might have to just shout out loud, unmute yourself and shout, or text it in the chat because I can't see my other functions. I don't know, do you all have the function to raise your hand? Is that a thing? Can someone just try it just so I can see if that's a thing? Yes, oh, perfect. I see that that is a thing. And then can I see who raised their hand? Let's see. Yes, I can. Okay, great. Thank you, Brandon. And thank you, Emma. Thank you so much. All righty. Okay, so yeah, you can use the raise your hand. That'll work as well if you don't want to just go ahead and unmute yourself. All right, and then the last thing I'll do is kind of our one of my teachers, I think Brandon, you're in this class, he calls it the eat your vegetables, right? But so the last eat your vegetables point that we have here is what should you do before, during, and after class? I just want to reiterate this one last time. So before class, hopefully you read through the text thoroughly, you took notes, you wrote down questions you have, and you did the GRQs, right? So to your point, Joshua, the homework is the GRQs and they would do before class. So I'll be checking that timestamp. In Sakai, it won't actually say that it's due right now because we have a bunch of sections and they extend all the way till Friday. We're one of the first sections. So it might not say that it's due today at 5:20, but it is always going to be due at 5:20 on Monday before the lab that we meet for. So make sure you have those completed. If you have any problems with that, you had any miscommunication with that, just let me know. Let's see what we can do. So then during the class, so right now, I will encourage you to be active and cooperate and be participative. Ask questions. So those questions that you wrote down, don't just let them linger. Ask them right now to myself, Annie, to your peers, and make stronger connections. So actually use your case studies to put together concepts that you might not put together just from reading the lab text. Yes, Didi? Is that correct?
Yeah, so what would you recommend to focus on? The reason why I'm asking this is because like after completing the GRQ online, I went to the slide for this session, and I kind of looked over it, and I noticed that some of the concepts that were kind of asked about in the like GRQ were not necessarily covered. Like the last part about the communicating or rhyming or something. So I was wondering exactly what should we combine both of them when studying, or just focus entirely on the slides?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So just to clarify your question, you're saying, should you focus on the lab text or the slides that we have prepared for class, or both? And my answer is that you should definitely focus on the lab text, right? So the slides are not going to be completely comprehensive. I'm not going to go through every single term. And even though I've annotated some of these slides and added a little bit more information just to enhance our learning, it really is the responsibility of you all as the students to come to class prepared with the lab text. There might be some bolded words that are just, the concepts, the conceptual, material behind it doesn't really lend itself to us spending time on it. But if it comes up and it's a question that you have, go ahead and ask it, right? Say we never get to it and you're like, oh gosh, we already moved on to this thing. I still have a question on this that we never even talked about. Go ahead and ask that, right? So that'd be a time where you would say, okay, I wrote down this question. I wasn't really getting it when I was reading my lab text, but let me go ahead and see if I can clarify something now. So when you come to class, I really want you to be in the mindset of, I'm going to be building on the information I already know rather than learning it for the first time. Does that help a little bit? Okay, great. And it's not your responsibility to look at the slides before class. You obviously can if you would like to, but that is not something that you are required to do, or that I even strongly recommend, because we will be going over it in class, just so you're more time efficient. Okay, and lastly, after class. So I really encourage you to review your thought process that you use in these case studies. So like I said, you'll all be working in teams, and some people might have a really innovative way of thinking through an idea that might actually lead to the right answer. So how did they think through that? How did I think through this? Put together pieces and parts so that you can actually build those stronger connections that will help you on these quiz questions that you'll get. And they will be higher order thinking questions. They won't be basic recall for the most part, right? And so look through the lab text again and search for each bolded word in complete anatomy. So like I said earlier, complete anatomy is going to be your guide for all things anatomy related, right? So any picture you see, it's going to be from complete anatomy. We're not just going to be pulling pictures randomly off of Google. These are going to be pictures from complete anatomy. So the more that you've already looked at this picture, you're like, oh, I've seen that before. I know exactly what it is, right? So that'll definitely benefit you as well. And then lastly, if you have time or if this is something that works for you, make a study aid. So flashcards work really well for me. Sometimes making a study guide works for me, where I write down all the important terms in more of a puzzle piece form, right? So not just writing down the word and by itself what it does separately, but kind of combining concepts together, putting groups of words together, putting groups of concepts together. So that would be the kind of summary of what you would do for success in this class. Does anyone have questions on that? No? Okay. I think the raise hand option works really well. So if you can raise your hand if you would like to say something or just unmute yourself, that would be great. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. Okay, so these are some screens that will be helpful in your study. Like Dee Dee was saying, these slides are available on Sakai, so you can go ahead and pull this up on your own. If Annie has a second, maybe Annie can send us the links in the chat so that they're there as well. But at any point, if we're talking about any of these concepts and you kind of want to visualize them on the complete anatomy screen, then I would recommend you take a look at these. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Sorry. On the spinal cord. So today's lab is really going to be focusing on understanding how the concepts of the vertebrae and the spinal cord and the spinal segments all piece together. So we're really doing everything besides the brain when we're talking about the nervous system. The brain will be next lab, and at that point you'll really have put together a lot of different pieces on how our nervous system works. So the spinal cord descends through the vertebral canal and gives off spinal nerves as it goes down, right? So we know that we have sensory and motor signals that travel to and from the brain, right? So sensory is going to the brain and motor is coming from the brain. And the spinal cord will extend from the medulla to the what? Anyone want to jump in on this one? What's the landmark where the spinal cord will end? The inferior portion.
Conus medullaris.
Yep. I don't know who said that, but that was exactly right. It's also on the slide. The conus medullaris is where it's going to end, right? So the conus medullaris is kind of named appropriately, right? So it's this cone-shaped, it's not going to be a dashed line. I hope you all understand that. It's not going to look like a dashed line on the actual anatomy of the ending of the spinal cord, but it is a section right here that kind of loops around and makes the end for then the cauda equina to extend from, right? And so this is the spinal nerves that extend through the sacral and the coccygeal regions of our vertebra. So the cauda equina is going to be right here. It's the L1 and the lower spinal nerves. L2, sorry, and the lower spinal nerves. And it's named cauda equina because it kind of looks like a horse's tail. If that helps you remember it. So it's kind of this horse's tail structure that we have in our lower region of our spine. So from L2 and below, and you can see it extends all the way through into our sacrum and our coccyx. Okay, and you can see that structure here as well. Let's see if I can point out where would the conus medullaris be. So it's actually right here. If you can see, it's a very faint little cone shape right here in this portion of the vertebra. And like I recommended, if you go on Complete Anatomy, you'll be able to see those images a little bit better. And so we also know that the spinal nerves will emerge through foramina between the vertebrae. Can anyone tell me what those foramina are called?
Is it the intervertebral foramens?
Say that again?
The intervertebral foramina?
Yep. The intervertebral foramen, exactly, or foramina for plural. Yep. So that'll be, so we don't actually have a picture of that, but we know that those are the little holes on the side where the spinal nerve can emerge from. Great. So let's see. Can someone tell me how many segments of the vertebra that we have for each of our segments? We have like the cervical, we have the thoracic, we have the lumbar, the sacral, and the coccygeal. So can someone tell me how many we have of each? Who wants to give it a try? Didi? Yeah, go for it.
Mel, I just kind of remember something about C1 to C5.
C1 to
That's the
C5.
cervical region.
Okay. So there's actually 7. I don't know where 5 came from. It might be something else, but there's actually 7 cervical vertebrae, right? And there's 12 thoracic vertebrae. There's 5 lumbar. There's 5 sacral, and there's 3 to 4 coccygeal. So at this point, you're thinking, golly gee, how am I supposed to remember all these numbers? Well, my TA had a really cute way of remembering this, and if this helps you, then by all means listen to it, and if not, plug your ears. But you eat breakfast at 7, so you have cervical has 7 vertebrae. You eat lunch at 12. About, right? So there's 12 vertebrae for the thoracic region, and then you have dinner at 5. I never eat dinner at 5, right? But that kind of helps you remember that. And then we have 5 sacral, and then 3 to 4 coccygeal. Does that sound good? Okay. Alrighty. So here's another really quick question. What is the region, some kind of landmark that we have that extends from C3 to L2? What could that be? Everyone's looking at their notes frantically. What could C3 to L2 be?
Is it the spinal cord?
So the spinal cord will extend, Matthew, the spinal cord will extend from our medulla all the way down to which vertebrae? Not T2, but L2. Yeah, exactly. The lumbar, right? L1, L2. But yeah, but thank you for answering. So cervical enlargement is actually where you're going to find from C3 to L2. And what is the cervical enlargement? Well, it's the region in our spinal cord. So let me get my mouse. Can you see my mouse on the screen? It's a weird question to ask, but is it like there, floating around? Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay, great. So you can see right here where the spinal cord looks a little bit thicker than it does in this region, okay? And so we call this region the cervical enlargement, and we call this region the lumbar enlargement. And what is the purpose of the cervical and the lumbar enlargement? Purpose, or why does it form? Why is it there?
It holds like more neurons to serve the upper and lower limb, or the cervical one's just the upper limb.
Yep, the cervical will be the upper limb, but exactly right. I don't know who said that. I'm so sorry. Who was that?
Nicole.
Nicole, great. So yes, the cervical will serve the upper limbs, and then the lower enlargement, the lumbar enlargement, will serve the lower limbs. Exactly right. So we just have this denser region of neurons because we know that we have these limbs that have to do these movements, and you know they're not going to be simple movements. They're going to need a little bit more density of those neurons to actually have that function happen. Is something going on in the chat? Okay, Annie got it. Perfect. All right. And lastly, we have this last structure that we kind of want to mention, which is called the filum terminale. And so it anchors the spinal cord, or the filum terminale was how I would say it, just to remember the spelling. So the filum terminale, and it anchors the spinal cord within the vertebral canal, right? But what segments does it actually anchor the spinal cord in? Is it the entire spinal cord? So from our cervical all the way down to our coccygeal, we have this filum terminale. Does that sound right, or is it something else?
I think
wasn't from cauda equina to filum terminale, like to the cervix?
To the, yep, okay. So I think, how do I see who speaks?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yes, so it will actually not extend the entire spinal cord, right? But it will extend from our cauda equina all the way down into our coccyx. So we can kind of see it. It's a little bit lighter colored, and it's referred to as a thin thread, right? And it's actually a material from what we call the meninges, which are the protective layerings that cover our spinal cord and our brain. So what material is it actually made out of? Which section of the meninges is the phylum terminale a part of? Anyone remember? So if you're not remembering exactly, but you know that this little thin thread called the phylum terminale, which anchors the spinal cord, is touching from the spinal cord to the vertebrae, then that would make me think that maybe it's in the deepest layer of the meninges. Someone might have said it in the chat. Let's see.
Is it the pia mater?
Pia mater, exactly, Julia. So we know that the pia mater is the deepest layer of the meninges. So we're actually gonna, I think, hop right into the meninges now. Nope, we're not. But that'll come back. We'll talk about the phylum terminale when we get back to the meninges. So yes, it is the pia mater, and it will anchor from the cauda equina all the way down, or actually from the conus medullaris through the cauda equina all the way down into the coccyx. Okay, so segmentation of the nervous system. So this is a really important concept. And so we already talked about how to remember how many of each type of vertebrae, the bone that we have for each segment, our cervical, our thoracic, our lumbar, and our sacral. We also have our coccygeal, which is 3 to 4, depending on the individual person. And so the important concept here is to note that we have 3 correlating segments. We have the spinal cord segment, right? And that's noted by this blue part right here. And it's numbered all the way down. And we know that the spinal cord will end somewhere around L1, L2. Okay? The next important segments or levels that we have is the vertebral level. So this is the bone, right? So we can see the bones following all the way through here. And these are obviously the other part of the bone on the other side of the spinal cord. But that's the next segment, is the bone. That's the next level. And the last level is the spinal nerve. So the spinal nerve, you can see, are these lines that are drawn leading out of the spinal cord segment. And they are numbered. I think these numbers are actually correlating with the bones, but they are numbered according to the spinal cord segment, right? So the important thing to note about this is that the portion where the spinal nerves originate is going to be more superior than where it exits from the vertebra. So what exactly that means is that here, even though this spinal nerve, so spinal cord C6, right, it emerges out of the vertebrae down here, you can see that superiorly is where it originates, in a superior section of the spinal cord. Now that gets a lot more prominent when we go down here, right? Because we know that the spinal cord ends a lot sooner than the nerves actually end and the spinal cord ends. So all of these nerves have to travel way down before they can exit through the through the vertebral segment. Does that make sense? Do we have any questions right here? All right. And lastly, we have these regions of the skin that are innervated by each of our nerves, and we call them dermatomes. There's a really nice picture in the lab text that kind of shows these, but these are not distinct outlines, but they kind of help us to understand how the nerves will innervate different portions of our skin. Okay. All right, so we have a poll everywhere question here. So go ahead, either join this link right here, this URL, or you can text ZM794 to this number. Go ahead and answer the following question. Does anyone have any problems with poll everywhere today? Everyone okay? Just shout it out if you have an issue. How many people do we have today? We got 3 more people, I think, and 2 more. 1 more. Alrighty. There we go. We got everyone. Okay, so let's see what we think. So where would you expect to find the spinal cord segment that communicates through spinal nerves that exit at the L1 vertebra? That's kind of a mouthful, but we just kind of talked about this concept, so let's see what we think. Oh. Okay, all right, so as we can see, a majority of us thought that it was a little superior than the level of the L1 vertebrae, and some of us thought it was a little bit inferior. So let's just talk about this really quickly. So what did we say about the different levels? We have 3 levels, right? We have the spinal cord level, we have the vertebrae level, and then we have the spinal nerve level. So this question is asking us to find, where would we expect to find the spinal cord segment that communicates through the spinal nerves that exit at the L1 vertebrae? And what we just said is that the spinal cord segment will always be superior to the segment that it innervates. The only exception is that the C1 nerve will actually leave a little bit higher than where it originates on the spinal cord, but you will rarely see, if at all, that question asked. But a majority, you can see, majority, if not every single other one, will exit a little bit inferiorly, or the other way to say it is that the origin is a little bit superior. Are we good on that question? Any questions? All right. So we'll hop right into the meninges. So we kind of briefly touched on this. Julia mentioned that the filum terminale is a portion of the pia mater, but we know that the general purpose of the meninges is to serve as a protective layering around our spinal cord, and I forgot to actually mention it's the spinal cord and the brain, right? So that's actually going to be an important concept as we go into lab 2, to know that these 2 concepts are connected. The meninges is the same meninges that runs to the brain, same meninges that runs through the spinal cord. So here we can see the different layers. We have the epidural space. So epidural space is usually lumped in when we talk about meninges, but it's not actually a layer of the meninges. The first and most superficial layer that we will talk about is the dura mater. So this is the dura mater right here. You can see this yellowish layer. That'll be the dura mater. The next layer that we have is the arachnoid mater. And the arachnoid mater has these columns right here and this little white thin layer that passes through, but you can see a lot of this dark space. And that dark space is called the subarachnoid space, right? What is in the subarachnoid space? Anyone?
Cerebrospinal fluid.
Yep, cerebrospinal fluid. Again, I'm so sorry I couldn't see who said that, but great job. So that'll be cerebrospinal fluid, and we can also see cerebrospinal fluid in this little pocket right here, which is called, anyone know? This little, oh, actually, sorry, not this one right here. The tiny little hole.
Anterior fissure or something?
The
Canal.
Yep, I think FA said central canal, was that right?
Canal.
Canal, okay, so central canal, this will be the central canal. And Dee Dee, this is actually going to be the anterior median fissure. I think that was what you're mentioning, right? So I pointed to the wrong thing earlier. This will also have cerebrospinal fluid, but it is more used as a landmark for us to know which side is anterior and which side is posterior. This is going to be the central canal. Again, an important concept to think about when we go to lab 2. Any questions on this picture or anything about the vertebral canal?
Could you point out where the filum terminale would be at in this cross section?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So Caitlin, the filum terminale is not actually visible. Do you know why?
Is it because it's covered by the pia mater as it's anchored down?
So the filum terminale, you can consider it as the pia mater. It's just the specific name when it's in that section, right? So we already said earlier that the filum terminale is located not in the entire spinal cord, but just from the conus medullaris down to the coccyx, right? But this is actually a cross section at C4. So you're not actually going to see the filum terminale. But that was a great question. And this is also a cross section, which means that what plane have we cut this cross section at?
Transverse.
Yeah, thank you, Gretchen. This is the transverse, exactly. So it'll also, even if we were in the appropriate area, Caitlin, it might still be a little difficult to see that filum terminale. It's a lot easier to see it when you're looking at it from the posterior view. You can actually very clearly see the filum terminale from that angle. Yeah, great. And one last thing that I'll mention, there's one more extension of the pia mater that we refer to and that you actually can see in this picture. And it is part of the part of the pia mater, and it serves a very similar function. Does anyone know what that's called? I know we're a little shy. If you feel like you kind of sort of might know it, go ahead and jump in.
Can you point at it?
I can point at it. Yep. So it is actually this one right here.
Is it the dentriculate ligaments?
Yeah, Presley, that's exactly right. So just a little nitpicky thing, I also used to say dentriculate ligaments, but it's denticulate ligaments. Just to make sure you know that when you're spelling it, because that was an error I used to make. But yeah, denticulate ligaments. So it will anchor the spinal cord to the dura mater. So like I said, it has a similar function, right, to the filum terminale where it anchors. It just anchors in a different way. So it anchors to the side of the vertebrae rather than down across the posterior portion. Okay, so I think, was it Matthew, I think, who asked where it is. So it's these two white layers right here. And you can kind of, this picture makes it a little difficult to see, but this other white layer that goes around, that's also the pia mater. All righty. We'll move on. And again, if you have any questions on,
sorry. So what is the difference between the denticulate ligaments and arachnoid matter?
And the
arachnoid matter.
And the arachnoid matter. That's a good question. So from what I understand, the difference is really the layer that it's in, right? So we refer to these layers because of how they are stacked, right? So if you can see, there is still a layer of the pia mater that goes around this way. The arachnoid mater is going to be this extension right here, and then the covering, this white covering on the top. Right, so it matters which layer we're in. They might be similar composition and material, I'm not actually sure. And they do kind of serve similar functions, right? They hold up the spinal cord in this, suspended in the cerebral spinal fluid in the vertebra. But it'll be a completely different layer. It's going to be more superficial to the pia mater that we know protects the entire spinal cord. So anywhere you are on the spinal cord, the only thing that's touching, the only layer of the meninges that is touching the spinal cord will be the pia mater. Does that help? Great.
Yeah.
All righty. And we'll keep going. Okay. I will talk a little bit about a few more things that you can see from a transverse cross-section of the spinal cord. So we already mentioned the central canal, and again, we can see that right here. It's this canal that goes through the middle. Not to confuse it with the anterior median fissure like I almost did. It's going to be this completely separated tiny little hole that runs through the entire spinal cord. We also have the anterior median fissure, which really the function of it is to orient us to the anterior section of the spinal cord. Not to confuse it, if you see pictures, not to confuse it with any fissures that you'll see on the opposite side. Just make sure that you're actually looking for this really prominent fissure that'll mark the anterior portion of the spinal cord. Oh, I need a laptop charger. I'll get that in a second. So let's talk a little bit about gray matter versus white matter. So does anyone know anything about the difference between gray matter and white matter?
Isn't white matter have the myelinated cells, and then gray matter is unmyelinated?
Yep. Essentially, yes. So white matter is myelated, exactly right, and gray matter is actually unmyelinated. But the reason for that is because the gray matter is going to be what we call the cell body, right? So that's where we have a bulk of material, and we have different types of neurons. So the cell body might be located in different locations on different neurons, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the dorsal root. But yes, so the gray matter is actually going to be what's colored here in this pretty pink, green, and purple coloring. This is actually going to be considered the gray matter, and the white matter is going to be surrounding the spinal cord. So keep in mind the order, which is superficial and which is deep. That's going to be important again as we go into lab 2. So we have three different, four different dissections of the horns. So we have the dorsal horn, which is here located in this blue purple color. We have the green, which is the lateral, and then we have pink, which is our ventral. So the dorsal is going to have all things sensory. So somatic, motor, anything, or sorry, somatic, visceral, anything sensory is going to go through the dorsal horn. So if that means that it's all going to be sensory, then any signal that comes in to the spinal cord is always going to go to the dorsal horn, no matter what type of signal it is. Now we have the lateral horn, which will come next, right? The lateral horn is going to be somatic motor, sorry, visceral motor. This is in the wrong order. It'll be visceral motor, and visceral means all of our inner organs, any of our smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, etc. That'll be our lateral horn, right? So this is anything that we can't really control. So if it helps to think of it this way, it's a smaller portion. We don't have as much control over it. It's the lateral horn. And then lastly, we have the ventral horn, and in some pictures it may look a little bigger. In some pictures it may look pretty much the same size as the dorsal horn, so don't really go off of the size or the shape of it. Make sure you identify where the anterior median fissure is, because that's going to be the side of the ventral horn. So this is a really good example of when ventral and anterior are kind of used interchangeably, because they're going to refer to both the same side. And the other thing to note is that the dorsal horn does actually have some kind of division where the visceral is going to be coming into the dorsal horn versus where the somatic is going to be coming in. And the visceral is going to be coming into the more, I guess for in reference to this picture, we can say the more deep portion. So if I were to draw a line right here with my mouse, it'll be this portion right here, the deeper portion. And then all the somatic information will be coming in if I draw that line to the more superficial, or the further, the closer to the white matter, right? So a way you can think of this is that anything on the inside, so these interior portions, so the inner portion of the dorsal horn, the lateral horn, they're the inside, inner organs, they're going to be visceral. Any questions on the gray matter? Alrighty. So let's do some more poll everywhere. All right, still missing 4 people, 3 people. And just a reminder, these are not for correction, although it's really encouraged that you try really hard so that you're getting some practice on these. So this question is going to be, I told you all that I would kind of tell you if this is going to be more of a quiz question or more of like a recall, so this would be more of a recall. Okay. So let's go ahead and check. So we said, what does somatic mean when we refer to somatic motor or somatic sensory? Let's see what you all think. Did I show the correct answer? Was that already okay? I might have. But yes, so this is exactly right. So somatic is going to refer to regions of the body that contain the skin, the skeletal muscle, and the bone. So here you can see that regions of the body that contain smooth muscle and hollow organs, or regions of the body that contain glands, those are going to refer to visceral. Anything visceral is going to be anything that we don't really have a lot of conscious control over, right? So somatic, we can control our skeletal muscles, bones not so much, but when you're looking at this division, it's kind of, it helps me to think of like anything I can move and consciously do, that'll be my somatic. Anything else that is less conscious, more inner organs, that'll be your visceral. And the same with cardiac muscle, that's also visceral. Okay, questions? Alrighty, so click on the region that receives sensory input. So if I'm not mistaken, you can just like click and it'll like put a little dot where you have selected, and I think there's a lot of different options. They'll like accept a region of answers. So go ahead and click on the region that receives sensory input. Was anyone able to get it yet? Yeah, okay. It's not showing me how many responses. Oh, do I have to activate it? Did I mess it up? Is it active now? Okay, sorry. Not actually sure when everyone's going to be done, so I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and see what you all think. So a majority of our selections are in this region up here. So first off, what is a really important thing for us to look for when we're looking at a picture of a cross section of the spinal cord? What did we mention?
Anterior.
Anterior, right? And this is a really great example of when these could both be the anterior median fissure, right? Like you really can't tell exactly. So they've labeled it, which is great. But usually the anterior median fissure is going to be the more prominent fissure that you see. But they've labeled it, so that's perfect. So anterior is here, then we know ventral, lateral, and dorsal. So a lot of us must be thinking, okay, dorsal meaning sensory input. So that would be in this region. And that'd be exactly right. So if we're in this region, what do we call this kind of area? Any of this right here? Lighter pink color.
The white matter.
White matter, right? So we don't get any sensory input or any motor input through the white matter. The white matter is a tract that we use to transport our information to the brain, in the spinal cord, and within our brain. Okay. Alrighty, so that's we're going to stop right there, and then we're going to jump into a case. So we've talked a little bit about how cases go. You already had some practice on that, which was great. I'm going to try to do the breakout rooms right now. But Annie and I will be jumping through the breakout rooms just to make sure that discussion is going good. And if it helps you, in 10 minutes after this case study is done, we will have a little break, if that's going to get you through it as well. Okay, Annie, it's trying to put you somewhere. Let's do 5 rooms. Okay. Alrighty, Annie, you're going to be in a breakout room, but let me know if you're able to like move yourself around. For everyone else, go ahead and join your room. I think it should be open. If you have questions, we'll hopefully be hopping by, but if you have the option to like invite a host, you can do that as well.
Separate documents for this. I think I remember there being one.
Yeah,
right?
the documents on Sakai. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Will we have to turn this in?
Yes, you will. So you'll actually be putting the, sorry, you'll be putting the document into your Dropbox. So just one person has to submit it.
Okay, so we'll need to make a copy of that.
Yep, make a copy of it, and then you can go ahead and share it with everyone.
Okay.
Write it. And Annie, do you have controls to move yourself around? I just want to check on that.
Let me see. So we go from, I'm not sure actually.
Is it saying, like when you go to breakout rooms, does it say join? No.
I don't think, yeah, no.
Okay, no problem. Well, we'll have to figure that out, but for today, just
Okay.
text me when you need to move. Okay. Okay. Alrighty. Hello. How can I help?
Hey.
Hey, since we can't edit the Google Doc, do you just want us to copy and paste it into a different one?
Yep, make a copy of it. Yep. So
Mhm.
that's gonna, yeah, because everyone's trying to use the same copy. So just make a copy into whatever format. If you want to do Word and share it with everyone on your screen, or if you want to do Google Docs and share it with everyone. Just if Annie and I like hop by, if you can share the screen so we can see what you all are working on, that'd be great. Okay, any questions, or I'll let you all get started.
We're just gonna upload one document per group, right?
Yep, one document. Just make sure everyone's name is on it. Sorry. Make sure you're good. Okay.
All right.
Let me know if you have anything else.
Do you still want us to include the PIDs?
No, PIDs is fine. Yep, just names is good. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Are we all situated here?
Okay, I just sent it. You guys should have access.
Is Zara still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, okay. So is it the Google Doc that you have up that it's like, is that the assignment right now that we're doing?
Yes, so it's the Google Doc and Sakai.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't doing some random assignment we're supposed to be doing.
No, you're good. So it's a Sakai document. Just make a copy of it in whatever format. If you want to make a Google Doc copy and then just share it with everyone. When Annie and I like hop between rooms, if you can share your screen so we can see what you're working on. But make sure everyone's working together. If you notice like your buddy over here is not really saying anything, like kind of encourage each other. This is really like a time for you all to work together. So. Alrighty. Hi, how's it going?
The doc.
You figured it out?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. So whenever Annie and I like hop between the rooms, if you can just share your screen so we can see what you all are working on. And if you have any questions, I think that you can do like an ask for help button, I think at the bottom. Yeah, okay. So everyone good here? Yeah, okay. A little quiet, but and just make sure that you all are working together, right? So if you notice that someone's being a little quieter, kind of help each other out. If you notice you're talking a little much, maybe leave some space for other people to talk. Work together. This is going to be hopefully helpful for you to put some concepts together. But if you need anything, let me know.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Hello. Doing okay still? Did I already stop by this group or no?
We're doing
I've already
good
been
so
in this
far.
group for...
No.
No,
Hi.
I haven't. Okay, no problem. So you all found the doc?
We did, yeah. We created a Google document with all of us on it. Yeah.
Great. Just make sure you have everyone's name on that. One person needs to upload it to their Google Doc, their Dropbox. If Annie and I are jumping between groups and we're kind of helping you facilitate the discussion, or if you have a question, just share your screen with us so that we can actually see what you all are writing. But yeah, if you have any other questions, I think there's like an ask.
I have a question.
Yes, what's
the document that we shared is like all of the activities for today. So can we just like do it at the end, or are we going to be in the same groups all day?
You're going to be in the same groups. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're doing case one and case two.
So we'll just do case one right now. You'll be in the same group, so yeah.
But can we like submit it in one document at the end?
Yeah. It'll all be one document, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have about like 7-8 minutes left, so just get as much as you can done, and then I'll check in and see if we need more time after that.
Okay.
All right. There we go. Thank you so much for that, Gospel. I really need for you all to let me know when things like that happen. Share screen. Okay. Alrighty. So we're doing okay on this last section of where information would be. Feel good on this and how it's labeled, being able to identify it. Yeah. So here you can see another ganglion. I'll just point that out really quickly. This is the sympathetic ganglion, again, where cell bodies are congregating. Okay. So hopefully that review was helpful. You have your notes with you. But if you can put all that to the side, I really want you to take some time and do this activity on your own. So go ahead and open this complete anatomy screen. Annie, if you can, just send this link in our chat. But open this complete anatomy screen on your own and label these structures So the structures are going to be labeled A, B, C, D, E. You're not going to see the names of the structures. But try to label the structure and the significance of it in a pathway, right, for a signal in our nervous system. I'll give you 5 minutes to go ahead and do this. And I think Annie just sent out the link. Let's see. And if you have any problems with that, let me know. But we'll do 5 minutes for this. Yes, Gretchen, just type it up really quickly and you can throw it in the Dropbox. That'd be fine. Thank you. This doesn't have to be too formal. You don't have to use this table or anything. Just write what the label is, what you think the structure is, and the significance. And again, as much as you can, not use your notes for this so that you're actually challenging yourself a little bit. That'd be great.
Sorry, how do we label on Complete Anatomy?
Yep, that's a good question. So you don't actually have to label on Complete Anatomy right now. If you wanted to make your own screen later and actually label it, that's completely fine. For this activity, I just want you to write it down. But Sophia, I can actually show you that at the end of class, or if a few other people want me to reiterate how to label things, we can go over that. But for now, just go ahead and write it down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We'll call it at 6:41. Yep, exactly right. If they're having problems, no problem. I'll share my screen like I just was, and we'll just talk about it a little bit. Okay, 1 more minute. Where's on me? So let's kind of reconvene and talk about your answers. I'm going to try my best to navigate on Complete Anatomy while I am sharing my screen. So let's see how this works. And if you can participate, that'd be great. It'll help us get through this a little less awkwardly. Yeah, okay, so let's go ahead and start with A. So let me see if I can find A. What are they labeling? A, they're pointing to this one over here. Okay, great. So can anyone tell me what they think A is?
Is it the dorsal ramus?
Yes, it is the dorsal ramus. Again, I'm so sorry. Who said that?
Caitlin.
Caitlin. Okay, great. It doesn't like pop up as your name when I don't know why it's not doing that. But yes, Caitlin, that's exactly right. So Sophia, you were asking how to label things. Right now what I did was I actually X'd out of the view function. Okay, so that's going to be the top right X. X out of that and click choose the screen, and then you're going to get into this editing mode that you're seeing right here on my screen. And so then you can go to tools, and then you can add a label from there. But yeah, so we can just click here and they show us that it's the dorsal ramus of the third thoracic nerve. So how cool is that? They show us exactly what it is. But yes, Caitlin was right. This is the dorsal one. Okay, perfect. Let's keep going. B. What's B going to be?
Is it the spinal nerve?
Actually, I'm so sorry. Caitlin, can I put you on the spot again? What's the significance of the dorsal ramus? Or anyone else?
Is it? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Doesn't it provide the sensory information for the back of the torso?
Yep, sensory and also
On the back.
So it'll actually also be motor, right? So we know that when we're talking about the rami or the ramus, those are designated by location. So you were exactly right. It's the back, but it's going to be sensory and motor from the back. Okay, so then B. Someone was going ahead with B. What would B be? B. Right here. Go
Is
ahead,
it the spinal nerve?
Is it this? Yeah.
Yeah, both of you were right. Spinal nerve. Exactly right. And what's the function of the spinal nerve? What's the significance?
Transmits information from into the brain. I don't know. That's the most basic thing.
Yeah, I mean that's perfectly fine. Yeah, so it transmits information to it from the brain. Yeah, it's this little junction, right? So it's like we get information from either the back or from the front or the side or from our organs, and then it goes to the spinal nerve. And it's like, where do I go now? So where's it going to go? If we're getting information from a muscle, or we're getting information from our stomach, right? So now where is it going to go? If it's in the spinal nerve, where's the next location? Didi, can I put you on the spot for this one? Where would it go?
What did you say?
So where would it go? From the spinal nerve. We received some information, right? Someone touched us on the hand. Now we have to do something with that information. So it's traveled from somewhere, right? And we know it's from maybe the ventral ramus, and it's into the spinal nerve, and now what? Where does it go?
I don't know. I'm kind of lost.
Yeah, okay, that's no problem. So this is actually a really confusing concept because of how it's named, right? So everything is named the exact same thing and you're expected to know what the differences are. So if this is something that you're struggling with right now, do not fret. You'll have time to let it sit in your brain. This is only your second time seeing it. So after you look at it again after tonight, hopefully it'll help a little bit more. And of course, we have office hours to answer any other questions. And Annie is there as well. So let's just go ahead and discuss what would happen next. So this information has traveled from our hand, right? Someone touched our hand, which COVID, probably not good to touch our hand, but something touched our hand, right? And we've recognized that. So it's in our spinal nerve and now it has to decide where to go. So it's actually going to travel into the dorsal root, right? So the dorsal root we know is always going to be sensory information. And we can identify the dorsal root by a few things, right? So dorsal meaning posterior, backside. And we also know that the dorsal root has a ganglion. So you can see it's a little bit bigger than the ventral root, right? We can see it has a little bit more bulging. Maybe not the clearest, but we can also identify by looking at the fissure what side we're looking at. Complete anatomy is not doing the greatest job of showing the anterior median fissure, but the anterior median fissure would be on this side right here, and we know that this is the dorsal side. So again, I can click it just to verify this is the posterior or dorsal root. Great, so that would be C, and we know it's sensory information. Can someone do D? What would D be? Oh, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't click.
Ventral root.
Ventral root. Yep, thank you, Matthew. That'll be the ventral root, exactly. So they might be even pointing to the ventral rootlets if you want to be very specific. But yeah, this is a ventral root, and it's going to be taking information. What's the significance?
Motor information.
Motor information, exactly. So information from the brain to wherever it's supposed to go. Now with motor information, we might kind of think that motor information means we're walking, right? Or we're talking, or we're playing a sport. But motor information can also just mean that we're sending a signal to our organs, right? Or to our heart. So keep that in mind. This is information to the brain through the dorsal root, information from the brain through the ventral root. Okay, and lastly, we have E. What would E be?
The ventral ramus.
The ventral ramus, exactly. And this one I think is T3, so they're saying that this is the T3 ventral ramus, but more generally, it's just a ventral rami. And was that FA? Was that, okay, go ahead. What's the significance of the ventral rami, or the ventral ramus?
Yeah, it carries the information towards the body, and it carries all sorts of information actually.
Yeah, which portions of the body? Which locations?
To the anterior part, like not the torso, okay.
Not the back.
Especially.
Yep. Everything but the back. That's essentially right. Yep. Or the organs. And then here, if you wanted to investigate this picture a little bit further, you can see that these are the connecting rami, or the communicating rami. I'm sorry. Didi, so you were asking what C is again? So C is going to be the dorsal root. Good? Alrighty, and again, like I said, this concept needs a little bit of time to sit in, and maybe it'll even make a little more sense when we talk about the brain and how it actually contributes to any of this passing of information. But just keep in mind, it is a pathway, it's a flow of information, and if you want practice on this, then ask Annie or myself. You can always quiz yourself as well, like if I pick up a glass of water, where is my signal from my brain, or where is my signal through my nervous system passing through? And you can do those practices as well to kind of understand this concept. Okay, we'll move on. I need to get good at the new share, but I have to go back. No biggie, we'll just go back and then we'll do this. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk a little bit about is the reflexes. So we have two types of reflexes that we focus on in this class. But first off, what is a reflex? So a reflex is any type of involuntary movement that doesn't require a signal from the brain to perform that movement, right? So we might say that if if you tap your knee and your knee kicks out by itself, well, your brain actually didn't even get that information initially to react to your knee getting knocked. Or say you put your hand on a really hot stove, your brain doesn't have time. That signal does not have time to go all the way up to the brain and then come all the way back down to tell you what to do, right? It's going to react really fast. So that's what we call a reflex. Now, that's not to say that the information doesn't eventually get to the brain, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Alrighty, so we talked about the monosynaptic reflex. When we say monosynaptic, mono meaning one synapse. So this is really important because we have no interneurons in a monosynaptic reflex. So you can see that we have this one synapse. And just to make sure that everyone understands this, and this is not something I'm just brushing over, but whenever you see two neurons joining together, we call that a synapse. And you'll see that the ball of one, like this is how it's drawn, right? This is not exactly how it looks in real life. But where you see a circle, that's going to be the start of the new neuron, and then the little carrot looking thing, that's going to be the end of the first neuron. So this is a synapse, right? So we can see that this synapse happens here, and by knowing this notation, we know that this one, the blue one, is the first signal, it's the first neuron. So it's coming from here, something happened, somehow our muscle was triggered, it's traveling this way. Here you can see that unipolar, that pseudo-unipolar cell body, and we can see that's the ganglion in our dorsal root, traveling up, going to the ventral horn because we have one synapse. So from the ventral horn, now we're ready to travel and send that motor information back down to the muscle to react, right? So we call this type monosynaptic, and an example would be the knee jerk, like I explained. When you kick your knee or you tap it and then your knee kicks out by itself. But like I said, it's not that the brain doesn't know eventually that this happened, right? So here you can see that there is a pathway of information that travels to the brain, but this is not essential for the action to eventually occur. Does that make sense? Any questions, let me know. And then we also have our polysynaptic. So polysynaptic meaning many, so we have many synapses. And here we're going to show an example of two synapses. So we have the blue, we have some kind of needle was poked at the skin. Our neurons reacted. They traveled up through the dorsal horn. We see the dorsal root ganglion. That's how we can identify it. Passes through, and we synapse at the dorsal horn for a polysynaptic. So here, that synapse is going to happen where some neuron is now going to take that information and travel to the ventral horn. And we call this an inner neuron because it's just passing information. It's not necessarily sensory or motor. And lastly, that information is going to be picked up by the ventral horn by a motor neuron to travel back down to the muscle that needs to, kick into action to do whatever it is, move your hand, pick up your foot if you step on a nail, whatever it is. And lastly, we still have that information that's traveling to the brain. It's not that our brain is not aware, it's just that it's not necessary for the action to occur. Any questions on reflexes? Is there a question on the Dropbox? I haven't set up my, yeah, so you don't have to set up a Dropbox. It's actually going to be in Sakai. FA. Does that help a little bit? Okay.
When I check Sakai, it just redirects me to lots of pages. Like, oh, I don't know what it is.
Huh, that's weird.
There's a protocol called WebDAV, and I need to set it up before I can upload anything.
Okay, let's talk at the end because that shouldn't be the case. It should be pretty simple, I think, for you to upload something. We'll talk at the end.
Right.
But for now, you can have another group member upload that. Or, oh, this is for your individual assignment. Hang on to that. We'll talk at the end. Okay, so here is another poll everywhere question on polysynaptic reflex.
FA, I think for the Dropbox thing, you go to the original page where it says list of Dropboxes, and then it'll have your name, and you can click on actions, and then it should let you do a file. So I don't know if you've tried that, but
I haven't. Just opened the part that said chat with files, and yeah, just easy the way you said, yeah.
Go to list of Dropboxes, and then by your name, it'll say actions, and then upload files.
Upload files. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah,
No problem.
thanks a lot.
Josh. Okay, we're missing one person. Remember, this is just for participation. Great. Alrighty, so let's see how we did on this one. So, through what nervous structures does information in the polysynaptic reflex flow? So it's actually going to be from the dorsal root to the gray matter to the ventral root. And this is no different from any other signal that is coming from a muscle or from our internal organs, right? It's always going to travel through the dorsal root, then through some kind of gray matter, potentially. If it's a monosynaptic, we might not even need that neuron through the gray matter, and then through the ventral root, right? Because we know that all information has to be sensory first in the dorsal root, and then any motor or information from the brain is going to be the ventral root. Does that make sense? So this is not really even specific just to the polysynaptic reflex. This is a general statement about how information will travel from sensory to motor. Good? One more. Four more people. Alrighty, so let's see how we did. So this question is asking, where does the sensory neuron synapse with the interneuron in a polysynaptic reflex? So we can look at this picture and we can even use the notation of what a synapse looks like to even help us with this question if we kind of forgot maybe where it will synapse. So we can see that we have some kind of nail, some kind of sensory stimulus has interacted with our skin, and a neuron, a sensory neuron has transported that information up into our spinal cord. And we know we passed through the dorsal root. Like Annie said, you can always check to make sure it's the dorsal root, not only by the anterior fissure, but also if you see a ganglion. Just make sure that you have some kind of identifying feature to make sure you know which way the information is traveling through. And then it's going to synapse in that dorsal horn, right? So we know that the dorsal horn is where sensory information is going to be received. So we have to synapse right here. And this is kind of also what we talked about in the last question, the pathway of dorsal and then interneuron and then ventral root. So here we can see the interneuron, this little short neuron. And because it is a reflex, we don't have to have a pathway to the brain first. We can just have a little quick connection to the ventral horn where the motor signal will then pass through the muscle that needs to be innervated. So that'll be dorsal horn. Any questions? So if it had asked where does the motor neuron synapse with the interneuron, we would then say ventral, right? Because the motor neuron is going to be this one traveling to the muscle, and we know that it will synapse in the ventral horn. All right. So we're going to jump into case 2 for now. This one, again, shouldn't be too bad. We'll do 10 minutes on this one as well. And if you have any questions, just shoot us a call on that little ask for help button. But yeah, so I'll see you all back here at 7, let's say 7:09. Okay, and once you're done in your group, just hop back into the main channel so I know that you all are finished. So let's open up a breakout room. Okay, think you should be good. Let me know if you have any problems. You good, F.A.? You got your notification?
Okay, so reflex. I think you said like an involuntary reaction that doesn't require input from the brain.
Yeah.
Anything to add? Oh, you can type it. Go ahead.
Like Presley said, does anyone have anything else to add?
I think that's good.
Yeah.
Explanation.
That's good. Also note, what would cause a reflex?
It would be sensory, like sensory from.
Yeah, like you're saying like your hand, maybe?
Yeah, like from a part of the body, like I guess the skin. I don't not necessarily the skin, but
Yeah. It's kind of tricky. So we talked about like the monosynaptic, right, where you can hit your knee and then it will just kick out by itself. And so that's actually almost like you're touching the muscle, right? You're interacting with the muscle. So maybe more generally, I like what you're thinking, Allison. But maybe more generally, we can say any type of stimulus, right? Stimuli that interacts with skin or a muscle that causes some kind of reaction. That would be a reflex, right? So like you said, if you touch a hot stove or you touch a nail, right? And a lot of times our polysynaptic reflexes, they serve a function. Can anyone kind of figure out what that function might be? Greater function that helps us survive, honestly.
To avoid pain.
Avoid pain, but pain means what? What does pain mean?
Injury or harm?
Yeah, exactly. Pain means something is wrong, right? If you're touching a hot stove, you better take it off there, and I'm going to tell you need to take it off there, right? That's why you're going to feel that pain. Same thing with like a needle or anything else that might stimulate you. So yeah, it's a lot about protecting, the person. The reflex is really there to protect us, especially for the polysynaptic pain reflex. All right, you all look like you're on the right track. Keep talking to each other, but if you have any questions, let me know. Hello. Can someone share their screen with me so I can just follow along?
I can try to do that. How do I do that?
So I think there's like a green little arrow at the bottom of your screen. Show up.
Okay. Let me know if that works.
Yep, I think I can see it. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so we said it's an involuntary and stereotype reaction due to simple wiring of the nervous system. Yep, that sounds about right. Anyone know why we have certain reflexes? Like, what's the function? What's the point of having? I mean, yeah, like our knee reflex is kind of cool. Like that we have that little spot that we can hit and our knee will kick out. But why do we have maybe our polysynaptic or our those reflexes? What is the function of it?
I feel like not everything needs to be like sent and processed to the brain. So this way, like, it's like a protection mechanism. I don't know. Pain.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, Nicole. Right, so like processing in the brain, that takes a little bit of time. And sometimes time can be the deciding factor between if you live or die, right? So we have some kind of pain that's stimulating us and it lets us know you're in a dangerous situation right now. You need to get out of there. So that's why we might have a reflex, right? If we touch a hot stove, if we step on a nail, if we, any of those type of pain reflexes, yeah, definitely a protective measure. Does anyone have any other questions while I'm here, or? Alrighty, let me know if you need anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
How's it going in here?
Pretty good.
Good?
Yeah, spinal.
Would it be ventral horn?
Sorry, was that a question for me?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I couldn't hear very well.
Do we have ventral horn? Oh, we do. Oops. Oops. Yeah.
Yeah.
So ventral horn, and then.
And the rest in the same order.
No, I meant interneuron, then
Ventral horn, then
Okay.
then the rest in the same order.
Yeah, you got it.
Horn, and then.
Just like we did before, same order.
Ventral.
So Caitlin, so
yes.
we are in the ventral horn right now, right? And we are looking back, we're thinking back at our complete anatomy picture, and what would come next?
The
spinal nerve.
Spinal nerve. So spinal nerve, remember, what is it? It's a junction, right? But we have something before that. It looks like this. You say this is our spinal cord. We have something that looks like this. And we might say that, yeah, the nerve is over here, but what are these?
The roots.
Roots. The roots.
Yeah, the roots, exactly.
Because it branches out.
Yep.
And then the spinal.
Alrighty. Looks like you all got this. I'll move on. Let me have any.
Where we find that info.
Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Zara. Can you check our number 3, please?
Alrighty. So actually, what we'll do is if someone wants to walk me through what your logic was really quickly.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Go ahead. Someone.
Nicole.
Yeah, I answered the question, so I guess I'll do it.
Go ahead, Nicole.
I was basing it off like one of the quiz questions in the lab text. And so obviously I'm not exactly sure where to put the spinal nerve. So you have the sensory receptor and then the ventral. Oh wait, this is wrong. Shouldn't it all be dorsal first and then ventral?
So you're thinking that because you're thinking dorsal is what?
Sensory, and then ventral's motor.
And that's true for the roots and the horn. But what's different about rami?
Oh, it can be either.
Yeah, it can be either, exactly right. So it's labeled based on the location, right, from where the information is coming from. So we know that the ventral rami will be front of our body, our limbs, the side of our body, and then the dorsal rami is going to be our back.
Okay, so then ventral ramus is right.
Yep, exactly, because we said this is his hand, so then ventral ramus would be right. Yep.
Okay. And then, yeah, I don't know where the spinal nerve comes into place, but then it's the dorsal root is sensory information in, and then like horn, and then interneuron, and then ventral horn, ventral root, again, don't know spinal nerve, and then, yeah, ventral ramus.
Okay. Does anyone like have any questions about this or any concerns? Like, is this the right order? What are we thinking? Do we agree, disagree?
I thought it was.
Okay.
I thought it was as well.
Yeah.
I just thought like spinal nerve was like all of these things in it. I don't know. I think I'm confusing, like,
yeah, so someone who agrees, Millie or Kyle, I think. So where would you put the spinal nerve? Why do you feel like this is the right place for the spinal nerve?
Kyle told me to put the spinal nerve there.
Okay, so Kyle, go ahead and tell us why'd you put the spinal nerve there?
I think the ramus kind of goes like further out away from the spinal cord, like towards the sensory receptor and muscle fiber.
Yep.
And then it kind of joins into the spinal nerve, and then that's where it switches either dorsal or ventral, depending on if it's motor or sensory.
For the roots.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. So the nerve, you can really think of it, although I think in like, general, if we weren't talking about anatomy, we might say, yes, the spinal nerve is this whole section. We don't consider that, Nicole. So the spinal nerve is really that little tiny segment between the rami and the roots. So it's that little junction that combines all those elements at one place. And it's a junction because it's a choice again, right? So it's a choice of where it's coming from, and it's a choice of where it's going or where it's coming in. So that's exactly right. The order is correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? All right. 5 more minutes. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Okay. In here.
I think we just finished up.
Oh, perfect.
We just finished it.
Okay, let's look. Yep, looks good. Any questions on the ordering? Good. Feeling confident? If you're feeling ready, you can head back to the main group and we'll meet you there soon. Doing in here.
I think we're good. We got a little stumped on the last question, but I think we might have figured it out.
Okay, so 5. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what did we all decide?
We said that instead of the reflex arc running through the brachial plexus, that it would go through the intercostal nerves, but still follow the sensory and motor pathways.
Interesting. So I didn't actually think about that. But let's talk about another option, right? So we are looking at if the situation were very different if we were doing the back and its muscles, right? So and we're looking at skeletal reflex, right? So because this kid's hand was what was touching the stove, right? And that was what was receiving the signal. Then what choice did you make based on the information that it was his hand? Going back to question 3. What choice did you make based on knowing it's his hand? well, I guess it wasn't actually a choice. They just gave you some options. But which of these structures lends itself to being an innervating structure of the hand, and not, for example, the back or the inferiors?
Wouldn't the ventral ramus?
Yep, exactly. The ventral
Is it
ramus.
on the front?
Yep, the ventral ramus is going to be all of the limbs, the front of the body, the side of the body, and then the dorsal is going to be only the back and its muscles. So
Okay.
a little bit.
So that would change. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep, and it would change not only in the beginning, in that first part of the pathway, but where else?
And the motor.
Yep, on the way out,
as
right?
well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Because if it's something on your back and you reflex, you like do something, you respond to it, you're gonna respond in the same.
Yeah, it goes back to your, yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Alrighty. I'll pull us back into the main group. Okay, any questions while we're waiting on everyone else to hop back in? How was that? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. Mostly thumbs up, okay. Gretchen has a visitor.
Oh, it's Nicole. She's also in the class.
Oh, hey.
She's my roommate.
Aw. Go ahead and take till 7:16, y'all. If you need a bathroom break, I know someone mentioned something, so just go ahead and take a break really quickly. We'll reconvene at 7:15, 7:16. If you're here, we'll start gathering everyone's video again. Start up again so we can get done. I know this has been a long lesson, and if you're feeling it a little bit, just know that if it's not all making sense right now, it'll eventually make sense when you look at it again in the lab text, and take some time to process this information a little bit. That's why I recommend not studying for the class right before you join class. Make sure you're doing it maybe the night before so you have a little bit of a break. Same thing after today. Please don't put yourself in a situation where you start studying for this right after 8 o'clock. I don't think anyone will, but make sure you're giving yourself adequate break and checking in on yourself, because I know there's a lot going on right now. Alrighty, I think everyone back. If you're back, if you can turn your video back on so I know you're here. Waiting on a few people, but I'm gonna go ahead and get started since we said 7:16. So we're just gonna wrap up with a few more concepts about the spinal cord. And at this point, we're gonna really be putting bigger pieces together. So we already talked about the reflexes, right? So we know that we have a sensory neuron, we have an inner neuron, and a motor neuron that takes a signal back to that muscle. So that's what a polysynaptic reflex will look like. And similarly, we have sort of that pattern when we see information that's traveling to the brain. But this is going to be different information, right? This is going to be information that requires our brain to cognitively make that decision about what to do. Sometimes we're not actually making the decision because it's something in our internal organs or our cardiac muscle or smooth muscle. But the times that we are making that decision, we're deciding to walk, we're deciding to wave, our information has to go back up to our brain and do something there, process it. We're not going to talk about all the processing tonight, but I really hope that you're digesting some of this information and bringing it back to lesson 2 when we talk about that next time. So we have sensory information that will arrive through the dorsal horn in the gray matter. So we've already talked about this several times. We know that the dorsal root will carry our sensory information, and all sensory information will synapse in the dorsal horn of the gray matter. And we know that the lateral and the ventral are reserved for the motor neuron information. So all information for the sensation is coming into the dorsal horn. From there, it's going to travel up to the brain. And so here we'll talk about the first pathway. So the ascending pathway is going to be the pathway that we call information that travels up to the brain. Ascending, traveling upwards, makes sense. We also call it this fancy spinothalamic pathway. And if you break it down, it actually makes a lot of sense. It goes from the spine to the thalamus. And I know we haven't talked about the thalamus yet, but you've probably heard about it in other classes as well. So the spine from the spinal cord to the brain. So that'll be the ascending pathway. And the ascending pathway sends sensory information to the brain, like we just said. And there's 3 different neurons that we have in this pathway. So the first neuron is what we call a periphery, or a peripheral sensory neuron, right? So we know that this is where a fly sat on our hand, and we receive that information, that sensation, on our hand. And we also know that every part of our the information that we receive is separated by what side of the body receives it. So in this case, in this pathway, in this drawing we have right here, we're going to talk about the right side of the body. So the right side of the body received this information. The information passed through the dorsal root, and we can tell that because here's the dorsal root ganglion. And we also know that all sensory information passes through the dorsal root to the dorsal horn, where it'll synapse. So the next neuron is going to be located in white in this picture, and that's going to be called the second order neuron. The second order neuron is an interneuron that will bring the stimulus up the spinal cord to the thalamus. Right, so it's a pretty long neuron. If you see here, so it's a very long neuron, and the job of it is really to transport that information from the dorsal horn up to the thalamus. But you can see here that we have this special thing that happens called decussation, or as a verb, to decussate. Right, so that just is a fancy way of saying that it crosses over to another side. And so we're on the right side of the body. The information is received in the right dorsal horn, but this information is now going to cross through the spinal cord, through the cross section of the spinal cord, to the white matter on the opposite side. So here we can see somewhere near the ventral horn of the left side of our spinal cord is where the information will travel to, and then it will shoot up our spinal cord all the way to the medulla. Obviously, this segment is really like condensed. This would be a lot longer depending on which spinal segment we are talking about, but it'll shoot up the spinal cord in the white matter. So the white matter is just carrying information. It's myelinated. You may know a little bit about this from another class you've taken about how the information will travel, and it'll go up to the thalamus, where we have depicted it as this circle right here. So again, it'll synapse at the dorsal horn, decussate to the opposite side in the white matter, travel up the white matter to the thalamus. And lastly, the third order neuron is going to be the neuron that transports that information to the appropriate location in the brain. So we know that we have different locations in our brain that can operate and function in different ways. And we'll talk again about that in lab 2. So don't worry about what happens in this process necessarily, just knowing that there is this third order neuron that will carry the information somewhere. For now, we're going to note that it is the somatosensory cortex, or the primary sensory cortex, you might see it that way, and it's located on the postcentral gyrus. So keep this in mind. It's going to come back immediately in lab 2, and we'll be able to put a little bit more pieces together. Questions on this? Okay. And then we have the information. It has done whatever it needs to do in our brain. Our brain has said, all right, ready to go. I have the information that I want to send back down my spinal cord. And it's going to leave through what we call the primary motor cortex. or the precentral gyrus. Okay, so this first neuron, which we call the upper neuron, is going to leave through from the primary motor cortex, and it'll travel down to the ventral horn of the spinal cord segment that we want it to synapse in. So before I go any further, I just want to note that this is called the corticospinal tract. Oh, the descending pathway is called the corticospinal because cortico will be referring to the location in the brain, and then the spinal, right? So keep in mind that these names, even though we do use descending and ascending, these ones will be really important to know. And so our upper neuron is going to originate, like I said, in that primary motor cortex in the precentral gyrus. It's going to travel down, and it's going to innervate in the lateral or the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Now, the difference here that is important to note is where the decussation happens. And this picture is drawn in a really weird scale, so just make sure you're understanding what's happening here. This is the brain, obviously, and this is a segment of what we would call, so this one says to the head muscles, but this is what I'm focused on right here, this purple part. So this is the what we'll call the medulla oblongata, and again, we'll talk about that a little more in lab 2. But the important part to note is that the medulla oblongata is all the way up here, right? Because we said that's the origin of the spinal cord. It's all the way up, right in our brain. And we have these medullary pyramids, which is where the decussation happens. So note the difference. With the ascending pathway, the decussation was in the spinal cord at that certain level, right? If we were in L1, it'll decussate at L1 and it'll shoot up. If we were in C1, it'll decussate at C1 and travel up. But here, no matter where the information came from, when it goes back down, it's always going to decussate at the medullary pyramid, right? So again, we had this information from the right side, it traveled up, it landed in the left side of the brain, it did whatever it needed to do, and now it's coming back down, and it has to go back to the right side of the brain, or the right side of the body. So it'll cross over, and it'll travel down where it'll synapse in the ventral horn or the lateral horn, depending on the type of information. And from the ventral or the lateral horn, our lower neuron, which is a motor neuron, will carry that information to the appropriate location. And we know that that's through the ventral root first, but then depending on where that information needs to go is what rami it'll go through. The other thing to note about this is that with the descending pathway, the upper neuron is actually considered an inner neuron, right? So it's actually not going to be considered a sensory or a motor. It is an inner neuron. It's just transporting the information to the appropriate spot. The neuron that will synapse here in the ventral or the lateral horn is considered a motor neuron. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on any of this information in these 2 slides? Because these are putting together some bigger concepts. So I want to make sure if you have any other questions, let me know.
Can you repeat where it decussates again for the ascending?
Descending?
Ascending.
Ascending, yes. So the ascending pathway will decussate at the synapse of the first or the second order. That'll happen at the dorsal horn, right? And then the decussation will happen within the second order neuron as it transports from whatever side dorsal horn it's on to the opposite side, white matter. Okay, so that's really important to know. It's not going to the ventral horn, it's going to the white matter on the opposite side. So we're on the right side, we're in the right dorsal horn. It's going to transport from the dorsal horn through, crossing over to the white matter on the opposite side, on the left side, and now it can shoot up. It's on the right side of the brain that it needs to be on. It'll go to the thalamus, and then it'll go to the left side of the brain. Right meaning correct side, right? So the correct side of the brain, and now it's on the left side of the brain where it needs to be. From here, we're in the left side of the brain, but we said that the information came from the right side, so we can't send it to the left side. That wouldn't make any sense. So we have to cross over again. Crossing over happens in the medullary pyramid for every signal that comes down from the brain, and then it'll go to the appropriate horn. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, great. So let's do a few poll everywhere just to make sure we're understanding these concepts.
Do you mind saying that one more time about decussation in the descending pathway?
Sorry, I was pouring water. I didn't want you all to get shook by that. Okay. Yes, so the descending pathway, I won't move the slides right now because it will mess us up, but the decussation for descending is going to happen in the medullary pyramids. right? So all the way up here at the initiation of where our spinal cord starts. So before we even get into any of our white matter tracts and our spinal cord, decussation has already happened. It's already on the correct side that it needs to be on. For the ascending pathway, the decussation is going to happen before it even starts to travel upwards to the brain. So that depends on whatever section the information is being received in. So if we're receiving information in T1, for example, decussation will happen in T1, and then it will shoot up the rest of the way to the brain, do whatever it needs to do, come back down through the medullary pyramid to the opposite side. So now it's on the correct side that it needs to be, shoot back down the spinal cord, and then it's on its way to travel through the ventral root. Does that help?
Yeah, so in both cases, it happens right away.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Both cases happens right away. With the brain, I mean, it could be a little more like right away, meaning before it starts to do anything else in the spinal cord. If that's the way to think about it, then I love that. Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, 2 more people for this one. One more. All right, there we go. Okay, so an ascending pathway typically contains 1 sensory neuron and 2 interneurons. That'll be correct, yes. And so it's really important to note that, I'm going to try to go back. So when we're talking about the 1 sensory neuron, that's going to be this peripheral first order neuron, right? So that's the information neuron coming in and synapsing at the dorsal horn. These 2 neurons right here, they're considered interneurons, right? Because they're not a motor and they're not a sensory neuron. Great job. All righty, one more. And by the way, these 2 questions would be very similar to what you can expect on a quiz. This type of higher order thinking, you know, putting together different patterns that you would see with the concepts that we're talking about. This is definitely a question that you can expect to see this kind of wording. One more person. All right. So the question says ascending and descending pathways are different in there. And the options are the number of PNS neurons involved, the contralateral control, or the location of decussation. So we talked a lot about the location of decussation. We absolutely know that is going to be different. And let's just talk about the other 2 options that we had here. So the number of PNS neurons, the number of peripheral nervous system neurons involved. So a peripheral nervous system neuron will be a motor or a sensory neuron, right? And we talked about how the ascending has 1 sensory and 2 interneurons. And then we talked about how the descending has 1 motor and 1 interneuron. So you can see how both of them have only 1 PNS neuron that is involved. So that is actually a similarity that they have. And then contralateral control, right? So we know that both pathways have control of the opposite side. So you start in one side, that signal is going to end in the opposite side of the brain, right? So if we're looking at the descending pathway, we're starting in the left, this is my right side of my brain, and we're starting in the right side of my brain. That signal is going to eventually travel to the left side. And vice versa for the ascending pathway, a signal on the left side of my brain that I'm receiving will then eventually travel to, did I say the right? I meant the left. A signal on the left side of my body will eventually travel up to the right side of my brain. So they both have that contralateral control. Does this question make a little bit more sense now? Any questions? And again, I know this concept is like something that you need a little bit more time to piece together. Take the time that you need, right? If there's a video that helps you, if you have anything else to input on this, please, by all means, jump in. But definitely take some time on this. If it's not clicking right away, that's okay. Alrighty, so we'll jump into the last case right here. This one shouldn't take you very long. I'm going to break this out into the rooms and we'll join back at 7:38. Oh, Brandon, which room were you in, Brandon? You remember? Brandon?
Sorry. I was in group 2.
2? Okay.
I don't think it went through. There we go.
There you go. You good, Matthew? All right, last activity. We got it. Yeah. Do you have any questions so far? I know you probably just started, but anything come up yet? Nope. Okay.
Not yet.
Okay, great. Just call me if you need anything.
Thanks.
Hello.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, I got it.
This is the last activity, so just push through. I think we should be in the home stretch right here. If you have any questions, I know you probably just started, but just shoot me a little ask for help.
Thank you.
Yep.
So
Vertebrae.
So is it like cutting the nerve like where it comes like out of the column, or like are they
I
bypassing
think
the
it's
bones and
saying
going
like
into the spinal cord?
L1 where it attaches to the spinal cord, I think.
So yeah, it would be superior.
I think it's superior.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone on
Oh,
board?
yeah.
So you're saying superior, right? Everyone on board, or does anyone have any questions? Why would it be superior? Can someone explain to me?
Is it because it says spinal cord and where the nerve travels under the vertebrae, but where it attaches to the spinal cord is actually superior to the vertebrae?
Yeah, exactly, Matthew. And you can refer back to that picture in that slide earlier, right? So almost every segment of the spinal cord is going to be superior to the nerve that it actually gives off, right? Because, and another way to think about this is that the spinal cord, it doesn't develop completely into our entire vertebrae, right? It's a little bit shorter. So you have to condense that information into a smaller portion in the spinal cord than the vertebrae has, right? And then we know that each vertebrae allows for the passage of one nerve. And if this is not clicking for you, no worries. It took me a little bit of time too. So just look at that picture again and ask me any questions that you have. And also, this is the last activity, so just push through and then we should be good. Okay. Shoot me a message if you need anything.
Column is cut.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do they cut spinal cord as well, or just the nerves leading the spinal cord?
How are we doing over here?
I don't understand the question.
Sorry, say that again, Efe.
I did not understand the
You did
question.
not understand the question. Okay, great. So, sorry, I having problems over here. Okay, so question. So it says a patient is in an accident and the right half of their spinal column is cut at the level of the spinal cord, where the L1 nerve is given off. So can anyone explain that in a little bit simpler way? Anyone?
So at the portion of the first lumbar vertebrae or nerve, that's where it's been cut.
Okay.
At the right half of the spinal column.
Okay, so the way that I'm interpreting what you just said, Catherine, is that you're saying that you cut at L1, the vertebrae at L1, right? Or at the nerve L1. But what I'm interpreting is that it says, and so just keep in mind, it says spinal column is cut at the level of the spinal cord. So how can you put that into play? What do we know about the spinal cord level versus the vertebrae and the spinal nerve level?
I mean, spinal cord level is superior than the vertebrae level.
Mm-hmm.
But like, did they cut the column like laterally or horizontally?
Yeah.
They just chopped off from the
Probably
waist,
a good
basically.
thing to know, right? I think that's a good question to ask. It is going to be cutting transversely at the level of where L1's nerve gives off. Oh my God, I just hit my phone. Oh, that's so weird. Oh God. Okay, I'm gonna mute for a second while I suffer.
So they just chopped off the patient from the waist.
No, I think that they just have a cut in their spinal cord. I don't think it's all the way through.
Okay, I'm back. That was intense, but we're back. Okay, so yes, so the question is about, I think we're trying to interpret what's the question asking really. If one person has, I see someone has the slides pulled up, so just go ahead and jump into those slides, pull up that picture from like the very first few pictures we had, and it divides the levels, right? Spinal cord level, vertebrae level, and then spinal nerve level. See if that helps you understand this concept a little bit. I have a few people asking for help. But what I'm going to say before I leave is that the spinal cord does not fully develop through the entire spinal vertebrae, right? It is abridged, right? It's shortened. So all the information that is spread out in the vertebrae and in the nerves is compacted into the smaller spinal cord, right? So look at this picture again and see if you can understand what it's asking from this.
Science and sociology.
How's it going?
Oh, nice. Hi, Zara.
Hi.
Can you clarify like the I can't say the word, the custate, that like that whole concept?
Yes. Annie, I'm going to move you to another breakout room if you can answer their questions.
I'll try.
Help them there. Okay, great. Thank you. Alrighty. So the question is about decussation. So what exactly is the question? What is it, or where does it happen?
For the ascending pathway, so does it decussate on the ventral horn?
Yes. So that's why the pictures can be a little confusing, right? So we know that for the ascending pathway, what type of information is coming in for an ascending pathway? Is it going to be motor or sensory?
Sensory, right?
Correct, sensory, yep. So ascending, going to the brain, so the information has not been processed, so it's going to be sensory. Yep, we got that right. So now, when it comes in, is it going to go into the dorsal horn or the ventral horn? So let's just simplify it to those two.
Dorsal?
Right, exactly. So we know it's sensory information. All sensory information will synapse in the dorsal horn in the spinal column. So now the question is, what happens to this decussation? It looks like it's going to the ventral horn, right? Well, it's not. It's crossing through, right? So it's crossing from the dorsal horn of, say, like the right side, and it's actually making a big diagonal to the opposite side. So it looks like it could be the ventral horn of the left side, right? But it's actually traveling to the white matter, diagonal from that dorsal horn that it comes into. Does that help a little bit? So it's not stopping in the ventral horn, right? Because we know that the ventral horn is where we're sending, we're in the ventral horn only if we need to send the information out. But we're still trying to get information to the brain. So we're not going to stop at the ventral horn. So you're going to start from the dorsal horn, cross completely over in a diagonal to the white matter on the opposite side, and now it's on the left side or the right side, whatever is the opposite side from where it originated, and then it shoots up. Does that help a little?
Does it shoot up from the dorsal horn?
Nope, not from the dorsal horn, from the white matter.
From the white matter, okay.
Yeah. So if so let me, I don't even know if this is a thing. Can't I do like a whiteboard or something? Yeah, there it is. Okay, so if this is this is gonna look real ugly, oh my God. Okay, that's what we're gonna deal with. This is dorsal, this is ventral, okay? So the information is coming in to our dorsal horn, and it's gonna synapse right here. And so this is some kind of ascending information that needs to go to the brain. So then, oh, this is drawn opposite. This should be this way, and then this should be a circle, my bad. Oh God. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense, but ignore my ugly drawings. Okay, so then it's gonna cross from here, from the dorsal horn. It's gonna cross through, and yes, it could look like it's passing through the ventral horn, but it's not gonna stop there, right? Because we don't have any purpose being there. It's gonna pass into the white matter, and then it's gonna shoot up to the brain.
Oh, okay.
Pathway. Does that help a little? One consistent big neuron that goes from the dorsal horn, crosses over, shoots back up to the brain.
Wait, just to make sure, where exactly is the neuron coming from? Like from the cut, right?
Sorry, what exactly is the what coming from?
The neuron that is coming through.
The new one, is that what you're saying?
No, the neuron.
Can you type it? I'm for some reason I can't hear.
I think Gospel's saying neuron.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay,
It's
okay.
just by accident.
Where exactly is the new, like this neuron coming from?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good question. So we actually, like, our spinal cord is just a bunch of neurons, right? And based on what part of the neuron we're in, if we're in the white matter, which is like myelinated and is really just used to transport the information, or if we're in the gray matter, which is where we have the cell body, the mass of our neuron, that's going to give it the color and the shape that we've been talking about, right? So we know that this is all gray matter, this little butterfly looking thing, and then this is all white matter, but really it's just a bunch of neurons all tangled together. So that's where the neurons are coming from. They're literally just kind of intertwined, and it's just this mass of neurons that make up what we call the spinal cord. Does that make a little more sense?
Yeah.
Did that help clarify your question, Sophia, and anyone else?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah? Okay, great. All right. Are we almost done, or we need a little more time?
We were stuck on number 2 about the sensory loss and like what the side would be. Because we were just trying to figure out like where the decussation would occur relative to the sensory loss.
Okay, so perfect. So now that you have the information, see if you can synthesize it a little bit, and if not, just call me back.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Same question about the decussating.
Okay, no problem. We'll do that. And let me move you again. I'm gonna move you to another group.
All right.
This is such a hard thing for me to do, but we're gonna, nope, not there. Don't go there. That's the same group, I think. Where'd you go? Oh, did I move her? I think I did. Ah. Oh no, I moved her to a blind group. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the question is decussation, right? So what part are we confused on? Anyone?
I guess.
Go ahead.
I guess just confused about like how you know if it's contralateral or ipsilateral.
Yeah, okay. So let's first put together a few pieces. So what, clues have you gathered from this case so far, or this question? What are some keywords you're looking at and that are kind of informing your decision right now?
So when the right half is like injured, so does that mean that she can't or he can't have any sensory information from the right half down from that cut?
Yeah, that kind of looks like what I'm reading, right? So it's saying that this patient has an accident in the right half of their spinal column at the level of the spinal cord, right? So a few other groups are having a hard time understanding the levels, but I think Presley, from what I'm understanding, I think you're understanding as well, that we're talking about the spinal cord, right? So if we had cut, say, a spinal nerve or even a root or a rami, that wouldn't have the same impact of cutting the spinal cord, because we know that if you cut the spinal cord, there's going to be a loss of either that sensation or that motor function below that cut, right? So because we understand how pathways travel upward. So if we are, say we had cut at L1 and we have information from L3 trying to travel up, well, as it's trying to travel up and it's going through L1, it's not going to be able to go anywhere because there's a cut, right? So that's how we can kind of process why information at a certain cut, anything below that, anything inferior, will not be responsive, right? So that's exactly right. We have this cut, and it's on the right side of the L1 section of the spinal cord, okay? So we also know that we have sensory loss, okay? Sensory loss is which pathway? Ascending or descending? Or sensation, I guess, not sensory loss, but sensation.
Yes.
Ascending? Yep, that would be right. So ascending is taking information to the brain. So we haven't done anything with it yet. We're taking it to the brain. So if we have sensory loss, is any of this information kind of helping? I don't want to give away the answer completely. Information kind of getting you closer to a thought process about what it could be? Or is it just making us more confused?
So we know that the information is going to cross into the white matter at that right then, before it even gets up to the brain.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I'm just kind of confused.
Yeah. So in the ascending pathway, the second order neuron decussates to the contralateral side. So does that mean that that is where the sensory loss would be?
Yeah. So you're putting together some really good information. So where is the decussation happening in the ascending pathway? Does it happen immediately or does it happen way in the future?
Immediately?
Immediately. It happens
Yeah.
immediately. Right? Immediately as the information is coming into that dorsal horn, it's going to decussate to the opposite side. So we're still at that level of L1. Say there was no injury, right? And we were receiving information at the L1 level. It's coming into that dorsal horn and it immediately will decussate to the opposite side. Okay? And then it'll travel upwards on the opposite side, the contralateral side, do whatever it has to do in the brain, come back down, and now it'll be on the right side again, the correct side. Okay? So now we're saying that below the level of the cut, will we have sensory loss on the same or the opposite side? And Presley, we were kind of talking about this a little bit, right? We said if you have a cut and you know that information has to pass through it, we know the pathways will travel in that white matter track. So if you have that cut, it's literally a road stop, a roadblock, right? So when you're traveling information upward, where's that information coming from? So let's say I'm on the right side and this information is ascending. Where did it actually originate? Was it originally on the right side or the left side?
The left.
The left side. Does that make sense? Because it had to be on the left side because it decussates immediately, right? So at that level, it's decussated and then it's now on the right side. So it's on the left side immediately before it even starts to do any vertical travel, immediately crosses over, now it's on the left side. So that original information was on the opposite side, but because we have a cut on the right side, it won't be able to pass through that cut. It's a roadblock. Does that help a little bit?
That makes sense.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let that process. Katie, even when I was LAing for this class, I was like, what on earth? Like, it takes time to really process through this, right? So even after today, if you all want to meet a little bit, if you have a group chat or whatever, this is going to be your group for the rest of the first 2 quizzes that we have. If you want to just take some time to really process through this question, it might help a little bit better, but don't force it if it's not coming right now. I know there's a lot going on today, so do your best, but this information will come as you keep looking at it a little bit. Okay. Any other questions I can help with?
So for this next one, does that mean it will be ipsilateral because it like comes down the other side? Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense though, Presley? Okay. And if it doesn't make sense, you know, if you're like me and you're a little shy to be like, oh, I don't get it, just ask, right? Just ask your friends and each other, hey, can you explain that a little bit more? It'll help all of you to grasp it a little bit better. I'm going to hop to a few other breakout rooms, but if you have any other questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Like, please help. Please.
That makes me feel better.
Hi.
Yay!
What's up?
Zara, we're lost without you.
Oh no. Good. Which question are we stuck on?
All of it. Last one.
All of it. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
No problem. So did we get question 1?
We thought we did, and we didn't.
Okay. That's okay. It's okay. And I was telling the other group, right? There's a lot of emotions today. If it's not making all complete sense right now, let it sit. We'll get to it at some point. I trust that you all will go back and look at your notes again. Maybe watch this recording too. Okay, so let's talk about it a little bit. So it says the cut superior, inferior, or at the same level of the L1. Okay, so this question is really coming down to asking us about the 3 different levels that we talked about. We have the spinal cord level, we have the vertebrae level, and we have the spinal nerve level. Okay, so what did we say about the spinal cord level in relation to a spinal nerve level? What's the relation between those 2? Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so what's the relation? I'm going all the way back here. So spinal cord level versus spinal nerve level. What's the relationship?
Superior.
the spinal nerves, so the spinal nerves for everything except the cervical are inferior to the spinal segments, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So even then, even some of these cervical will still be a little inferior, right? Just based on how the body is structured, right? So the important thing to note here is that the spinal cord is so much smaller than the vertebrae itself, right? The vertebrae is pretty long. And the spinal cord is a really condensed amount that has to still fit the same information as it passes through the vertebrae columns. So anything here is all squished up because it has to then pass down through the sacrum and the coccyx to get to its exit, right, for the right vertebrae section. So we can almost always say that the spinal cord segment will be superior to that nerve segment, the same alignment. Does that help a little bit? So again, we have to specify. We say that the spinal cord segment, so if we're talking about L1 of the spinal cord is going to be superior to L1, the spinal nerve.
So is the spinal cord of that segment always superior to the nerve?
Yes, and you can see that really clearly in this picture, right? Because every one of these nerves has to travel down before it actually leaves the body or leaves the vertebrae, right? So this is what we could, don't look at this as like where the nerve is. Look at this as where the nerve is, right? So follow this. So this one, we follow it. Oh, it's definitely superior. The segment of the spinal cord is definitely superior to where the nerve is. Does that help a little?
Okay.
Yeah, same thing here. See, so right here. This is C8, right? So this is the spinal cord segment that gives off C8. But C8, it starts right here, and we have to go a little superior to find the origin of the spinal cord segment from where it originates.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that cord is superior to not only the spinal nerve, but to the vertebrae?
So the vertebrae gets a little tricky, right? Because they kind of align. Of course, they get a little different as you travel down. Like obviously these are so much more inferior than the spinal cord segments. But I don't think I've ever seen a question that asks you about the vertebrae segment. It'll usually be about the nerve in relation to the spinal cord.
Okay, awesome.
But if you do, you know already, you know that each segment of the vertebrae correlates with the segment of the spinal nerve. And I mean, you can make that generalization. I think it's just a little trickier because of how big the vertebrae are. You can overlap a little bit, so it's a little tricky. Okay, how are we doing on the other questions? Should I give you all some time to think on it?
Honestly, we were thinking really hard on it. And I think it was just because we don't particularly know where the decussation occurs, like in relation, we get like how to describe it and explain it and draw it out. But then when it gets to like specifically where the cut is, we get
right. Okay, this is what we'll do. We'll just call everyone in because I've had this question a few times, and then we'll just see if we can clarify because we have about 4 minutes. I don't want to run over, but let's see if we can do that. And then
thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Always muted. Hi everyone. Okay, so I called everyone back in. I know you might not have been finishing. You might have finished it. You might still be finishing up on your case study, but I want to clarify a point that I've gotten a few questions on at this point, which is the decussation, and it's question 2, right? And it's tricky. I'm not gonna lie. It's a very tricky question. Even when I taught this class over the summer, I still looked at it with a blank stare because it's a hard concept, right? But I want you to be okay with that. I want you to just sit with the material that's uncomfortable right now, and then eventually it'll get there. So, but let's do a little bit. I'm gonna try to do a drawing. The last group over there saw my horrendous drawing, but we'll try again. I think that it helps to show in a drawing what's happening here. So we are talking about sensation, right? We're talking about a sensory loss. So what type of pathway is that? Ascending or descending?
Ascending.
Perfect. Okay, so we're doing ascending. Okay, so what do we know about the decussation of ascending?
Happens in the spinal cord.
Happens in the spinal cord. Yep, and it happens. Someone said this I actually really like this concept. They said that it happens immediately, right? And it happens immediately for both pathways, but let's just talk about the ascending. So the ascending decussation happens immediately. So what exactly does that mean? So here is the butterfly of our dorsal and ventral horns. This is going to be dorsal, this is ventral. And so now we're going to draw the neurons that come in. So we're talking about ascending, and we're talking about some kind of sensation. So that neuron, will come in, and it will innervate, and it will pass the information onto an interneuron. So here's our interneuron. So at this point, this interneuron is actually very long, right? Because it's passing from whatever spinal cord segment we are all the way up to the thalamus. So what happens is it doesn't stop in the ventral horn when it decussates, travels all the way to the opposite white matter. So watch this. Travels from the dorsal horn, and yes, it looks like it's going through the ventral horn, but it's not going to stop there. It's going to stop in the white matter, the opposite side of the dorsal horn that it originates. So if we call this the right side, and this is going to be the left side, and it's the white matter, not the ventral horn. And from here, it's one continuous pathway here, and it shoots up, and it'll synapse at the thalamus at this point. Okay. So what's really important to note here is that decussation happened immediately, okay? And we're in L1. We're in L1. Now the question asks, below the level of the cut. So a lot of you probably heard, right, that we have a spinal injury, a spinal cord injury. It could lead to paralysis or loss of sensation, but we also know that that loss is below the injury, right? It's not ever above. And why is that? Well, it's really clear right here because information travels upward. It doesn't usually travel for a sensation. It's not going to travel downward. It has to travel upward to the brain. So any information traveling upward has to be able to get all the way to the brain for sensation to actually happen, right? So say we were in L1. Say this picture is actually a drawing of L4. What happened? Well, the sensation information came into the dorsal side, to the dorsal horn on the right side. It decussated. It traveled to the white matter on the opposite side, and it started shooting up. But what happened was we had an injury right here. So our information is not able to pass through. So say I had drawn like another spinal cord segment, right? And we had an injury here, and there's like, it's just not, nope, bad, not gonna work. It's not gonna pass through. So that information has been blocked. Okay, but let's look at where that information originated. Did this information that's now on the left side originate on the left side? Did it originate on the right side? The right side, right? And we can see that really clearly in this picture. Yeah, the right side, exactly. So this question, now don't get confused, and again, take some time and look at this case study again, but this question is asking us to look at what's happening at the same level of the cut on the right side. So the cut was on the right side. The cut was on the right side, okay? So if okay, here it is. The cut was on the right side, so they say this is the cut right here. And any information traveling up, any information on an ascending pathway up gets stopped right here. Where did this information originate? On this same side, on this same right side, or did it originate on the left side? It originated on the left side, right? Because this is all exactly mirrored. Okay, so do we see how that contralateral side can get affected below the level of a cut for an ascending pathway? Does that make a little bit more sense?
So would it be contralateral for both sensory and motor?
No, not for sensory and motor. That's a good question. So then what happens with the motor? The same thing the same concept will happen, right? We have to draw where the information is originating. So this one says below the level of the cut, will there be motor loss on the same or the opposite side? Well, when we have, let me clear all this. When we're talking about when we're talking about the descending pathway, the motor information is coming down. Here is our injury, right? And we have this pathway coming down, and this information originated in the brain on this opposite side. It crossed through at the medullary pyramid, and now it's coming down. Is it going to stay on this side, or does it have to cross again?
I think it's gonna stay on that side because it's not going back up, right? It's descending.
Yeah, it's descending. So it's already crossed, right? So it's going to stay on the side. Exactly right. It's going to stay on the side. So this is going to lead to, is it contralateral or ipsilateral? Because a motor lot, so if it was functioning properly, right, the motor would be on this side, but it's not functioning properly. So it would be ipsilateral. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we have to look at where this cross happened, where the interaction is with the injury, and what would happen if it gets like a roadblock, right? It can't move further. So any information, any motor information, it would be stopped right here. It couldn't move down. So that's why if you have an injury at your spinal cord, you can't, you'll have a paralysis at that location and below. Does that make sense? And we can see that from the same thing with the ascending pathway and with the descending pathway. This is literally a block, a roadblock. Information can't come up, information won't come back down, but anything above it, it's functioning fine. Yeah? So we're 3 minutes over, and I called everyone back because I hope that clarified a little bit more about what we were talking about. Sorry to keep you over those few minutes, but again, this is going to be some information that you need to take some time to process. Look over the slides. Let me share my screen really quick. Okay. So again, like some future steps, just look over the slides, make sure everyone submits their Dropbox assignments to me. 1 person per group for the case studies. This, not applicable, it's late at night, go get some rest. Look at this in the morning or some other day. But make sure that you are reviewing this information and this is not the last time you look at it before the quiz comes up. We didn't get to do the Kahoot with Annie, which I'm so sorry about, but maybe we can see if Annie can either send that out or if she has some other review session, maybe we can go over in office hours when you join me for my office hours on Wednesdays and Fridays. And these are just a few notes to help you when you're studying. I kind of talked about these in the beginning as well. Does anyone have any questions on the lab? This was a longer one. Lab 2 might be a little shorter, but again, it's a little bit of a longer one. And then we'll get into our group with 3, 4, and so on. But are there any questions I can answer at this point? Alrighty, well, oh, so Annie said if anyone wants the Kahoot link for review, then she'll send that out. And yep, so there it is. And I'll also post that in our Sakai page. If you want to get like your group together, if you've already exchanged numbers, this is going to be your group for the next few weeks until our second quiz. So if you want to kind of get together and all do the Kahoot together, that might be a fun way to study. But again, make sure this is not the last time you look at this material. That's all I ask. Alrighty, well, if you have no other questions, then you're free to go. Thank you so much for being here. I'll stay back for a few questions also.
Just a quick question. So sensory is always going to go up and motor goes down?
Sorry, say that again?
So motor information is always going to go up while, no, sorry. Sensory information goes up while motor goes down?
Yeah, and you can think of it as like the brain is the destination or the wherever you're leaving from, right? So if you're going up, you're going to the brain because the sensation has to do something with it. Process it, it's figured out what to do, sending it back down. And I mean, that makes sense because our brain is at the top of our head. If our brain was like in the middle of our back, it wouldn't be the same, right? Make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. And Emily, absolutely. I 100% understand.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Let me see.